Hey everybody, it's Michael I. Haber. Welcome to another episode of Artist Firsts. As I personally said before, in life, we never forget the first opportunities that we got to do and how much it's changed us as people. Now, coincidentally, this year actually commemorates 10 years since I actually did this particular project. So in 2015, I did a off-Broadway play called The Events at the New York Theater Workshop. This was a play that came all the way from the UK that made its premiere in New York, and I was lucky enough to be part of the world premiere off-Broadway run, and it's really changed my life. So a little bit of the breakdown. The Events was a play written by the Scottish playwright by the name of David Greig, and he teamed up with his lifelong collaborator, Ramin Gray. Set in the aftermath of a massive shooting, it centers on a female priest who runs a community choir, who some of its members were just the target of the shooting. And so she goes on this journey to try to figure out why someone so crazy would put someone's life at risk. It's a two-person cast with a different choir every night. The story mainly it centers on community, healing, and really just learning about the power to go on. The play was also inspired by the tragic events of the Norwegian massacre back in 2011, where this guy went up to this island and he disguised as a cop and shot about 60 to 70 kids, which is very heartbreaking. The events of what was going on took a big toll on both David Greig and Ramin Gray, so they decided to go a couple of years later to Norway, and they interviewed all the survivors there who were like witnesses to the whole event and what it was like, and that's how they got a lot of their inspiration. And then it was there where they met a female priest that actually did run a choir, and so that was how they kind of centered the whole piece, the structure of the story. The show was premiered and produced in 2013 by an innovative company by the name of the Actors Touring Theatre Company that started in Edinburgh, and then it went to London and several parts of Europe. And because it did so well there, they decided to expand with it and bring the show to America. So I was lucky enough to be part of the American premiere of the show in 2015. It was off Broadway at the New York Theater Workshop. So how did I get involved with the events? So I actually found an ad on Facebook while I was doing my usual rounds looking for many jobs and auditions as possible. And it said, would you like to be considered to be part of our community choir for a new off-Broadway show at the New York Theater Workshop? So I always knew about the New York Theater Workshop for a very long time, especially being musical theater. This 200-seat off-Broadway house has been the home to both world premiere original plays and musicals. It opened in 1979, and many of the shows at the New York Theater Workshop later transferred off-Broadway to Broadway, winning a lot of Tony Awards, including Jonathan Larson's Rent, Peter and the Starcatchers, Once, and then later it was home to the premiere of HADESTOWN, the revival of Merry Roll Along, and so much more. If anyone remembers the TV show Smash, this was where Hitless was filmed. They also filmed many of the musical numbers for the movie Tick, Tick, Boom here. So I submitted my information, and I didn't hear anything about it for a couple of weeks, so I was just like, whatever. But then I got another email a couple of weeks later saying, congratulations, would you like to be interested in performing in the choir for the events? And I said, absolutely. And luckily, I did not have to audition for it. They just asked for my range, and the rest was from there. So the choir I was part of was called the East 4th Street Singers, which was made up of family, friends, and fans in the New York Theater Workshop. And it really went with the spirit of the whole show because it's all about community coming together and just always being there for each other, even in tough times, which was very inspiring. For the run of the events, we were scheduled to do about 7 of the performances as the East 4th Street Singers, and then the rest, they had different school choirs and professional choirs. And then what was really special was that if, God forbid, any of the choirs dropped out at the last minute, a couple of weeks in advance, then East 4th Stringers, we acted as the standby choir just in case something happened. So this is the binder of my score and the script and everything. So I got this on the first day of rehearsal. This has just, I also printed like the website and just all the key information, frequently asked questions, the schedule. This is the review we got from the New York Times about the off-Broadway run. So we actually didn't go on until right after opening, which is pretty crazy. So we actually had it very lucky because sometimes previews can be very crazy. More press, and then this is all of our music of the entire score in order. And then this is a copy of the actual script that was later published. So I actually added it next to the binder. So it has the entire script of the play. And then I did have a line when we went on. I actually had the same one every performance. So my line was, "What's your favorite film?" And then the guy who plays the boy, who is the male track, the way he says Lord of the Rings Part 2, he would say it like, "Lord of the Rings Part 2. That was the best line ever. This was personalized by our leading lady, Nev McIntosh. Some of you might recognize Nev as the lizard-faced Madame Vastra on the TV show Doctor Who, so she was our leading lady. And then every performance, they had like a little slip of the choir, so this was the bio of us. Today's performance features the East 4th Street Singers. Little opening night card for the cast and creative team. Rehearsals for the events began in January of 2015. We rehearsed once a week for 3 weeks. It was very fast. So we rehearsed at the rehearsal studio upstairs at the theater. And it was really cool just to think about the incredible history of all the great shows. Before they even went into the theater, they were in that same room. For me, on a personal level, it got very emotional because I was a lifelong Rent head my whole life, especially during my teenage years. And Rent is also another one of my dream shows that I would love to do. I would love to be Mark Cohen. This is why I'm vlogging all the time. But when we were in the rehearsal studio, you thought about the spirit of the original cast of Rent when they were there in 1996. And then just thinking about Jonathan Larson and just the piano where he sat at when he was going through all the changes and the rewrites for the show was very emotional, but we really felt his spirit there. But we were in great hands of our amazing leader, David DeBon, who helped put everything all together for the choir, make sure we sound great and feel right at home. David DeBon is one of the coolest music directors you'll ever work with. Also an incredible Grammy-nominated orchestrator. He's done a lot of dance arrangements for many Broadway shows, including Sondheim on Sondheim, the revival of Dancin', Beetlejuice, Sign of the Times, and so much more. So we had our own 3 rehearsals as East 4th Street Singers. Then we had a 4th additional rehearsal where we all came together for one big extra rehearsal. And then afterwards, as the matinee was coming out, we went into the theater, and then it was us and a couple of the other professional and school choirs came in, and we did a full sing-through of the entire score of the show, all as one. And let me tell you, everyone sounded so beautiful when we all blended together. It was also the first time we were going to get that feel of what it was going to be like to be on that actual stage. You bet I took a moment singing Seasons of Love when I got up on that stage. Fast forward to our first performance, which was on Sunday, February 15, 2015. It was a matinee. I'll never forget it. But that first performance alone, it really felt like a blur at first because when we were rehearsing the music, we were just mainly focused on those songs with David DeBon and so on and so on. So we never got to do the full show with the additional dialogue and the blocking and everything until the day of. So this is where pretty much a typical day in the life of doing the show comes in. So as part of the choir, I would have to arrive at the theater no later than 2 hours before the performance. Oh, and this was, by the way, the first time that we got to work with Nev McIntosh and Clifford Samuels, the 2 leads, plus the main musical director, Magnus, and McKenna, who were both so lovely and really, really cool. So we would start with a 15-minute physical and vocal warm-up with both Magnus and McKenna, just so we can get our bodies and our voices in check. And then what would happen is Nev and Clifford would join us, and then we would start blocking through the bits of the show where the choir is involved. Not just we were serving as Nev's character Claire's community choir, but we were also the Greek chorus, being the voices in her head while she goes on this very dark journey. A lot of us got speaking lines throughout the course of the show, and then also there's this one bit called the Shamanic Ritual, where we just get to move around freely, very tribal, so it was really neat. All of that would take for about an hour, so that wasn't too bad, going from start all the way up to bows. Then we would start going backstage and get ready for the show. Our attire was very simple. It was just casual clothes like we're going to rehearsal. Everyone in the choir wore something different to each performance, but for me, every time we went on, I wore the same exact outfit. T-shirt and khakis. This is just in case someone illegally recorded the show and posted a slime tutorial on YouTube. Slime tutorial, aka bootleg. So then we would hang out for an hour, chilled out, talk to people, and get ourselves mostly prepared. And I remember one of the company managers, his name was Alan. I remember he would always come in and share a lot of great stories about the New York Theater Workshop's early beginnings, notably during the time of Jonathan Larson's Rent, and how much Jonathan played a big major impact in really opening the doors to the New York Theater Workshop even more. Now, a lot of people don't know about this. Rent was the first musical ever produced at the New York Theater Workshop. And to hear those stories, how Jonathan struggled for 10 years to get his work produced on New York stage, and then he got this opportunity to have his show that he was working on produced on their stage, but he never lived to see his show go on to become the phenomenon that it was. But really, it was Rent that put that theater on the map. But a lot of people today consider Rent as the 90s version of Hamilton. And speaking of which, with that show, at the time when I was performing in the events at the New York Theater Workshop was when Hamilton had just opened Off Broadway at the Public Theater before it went to Broadway. So I do have some memories of passing by the Public all the time, and lines would go all the way around the block. You could not even get a ticket to that, so that was pretty crazy. After an hour was when we got into places, and then it was time to do the show. But like I said, the first night we went on, I remember it was such a blur because it was then the first time that we were starting to add the sound and the lights and everything that was going on. And another thing about this particular show was that as the choir, we were on stage the entire performance. For us, we were experiencing the entire play happen before our eyes for the first time. So there were some very intense moments that got us reacting. Or I actually remember there's a scene, spoiler alert, where Nev's character gets into a fight with Clifford's character. And then at one moment, she spits right on his stomach. And I remember the whole audience and all of us were like, we were gasping so loud. I was like, oh my God, this is going to be intense to go through. But luckily we were able to make it through for the first night, but we were still very nervous. We were shaking. But then once we got into some of our later performances, that's when we really got used to everything. Oh, and another crazy part was towards the end of the show, during our major climax scene, where Clifford's character, the boy, confesses to Nev's character, Claire, that he's the killer. A phone went off. It was right in the middle of that scene, and for some reason, we heard the sound of a loud marimba in the first couple of rows. At first, it was very loud, and we thought it was initially coming from the speakers, believing that it was part of the show, but then we found out it wasn't, and we were like, are you freaking kidding me? Even Magnus, I remember, got so pissed off. Please, people, remember to turn off your phones before the show. But a lot of the pieces that we did in the show were kind of like a mix of religious pieces, and then also one of my favorites was they took a snippet from this Dizzy Rascal song. It's a rap, but they arranged it as a choral piece, the song Bonkers. For those of you who don't know, it goes, I wake up every day is a daydream. Everything in my life ain't what it seems. But then the way how it's changed to, I wake up every day is a daydream. Everything in my life ain't what it seems. I thought that is so cool. And I remember we did this beautiful version of How Great Thou Art, where we had these chairs on the side of the stage. We put them on and we're sitting all facing stage left. And yeah, it was a beautiful moment. And then there was this other piece called Gavrilo Princip, which was kind of very rocky. So that was like our big rock and roll moment where we got to be angry, and Clifford, who played the boy, was rocking out with us. So that was really cool. But one of my other favorites was the very last song in the play. It was a song called We're All Here, which is all about community coming together and just being there for one another. But really, the events was really a celebration of community all coming together. And that's something that I've always loved my whole life, being around a group of other people from all different parts of life, but we all share the same drive and the passion for singing and telling a great story. And that's what made it so much fun. And everyone was just so open, encouraging, and really just the bonding that we built right after that show was very special. So I give all my credit to the New York Theater Workshop for giving us this amazing opportunity to all come together, and hopefully that eventually I get to do something like this again real soon. I'm so grateful. Thanks for watching.